Welcome to Thought to Action, presented by the London Center for Policy Research, where we delve deeply into important issues, examine ideas, discuss solutions, and put forth our thought to action. I'm joined today by distinguished fellow Bryan Griffin to discuss a number of key issues that relate to current events, something called court packing. We'll get to that in one second. But if you enjoy our content and video, and would like to help us create more, please like, share, subscribe, join our Patreon community. Be sure and check us out on all the social media. And obviously, if you join our Patreon community, you get to participate in our Thought to Action events where you get to ask us questions and we do our best to answer them. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and obviously check us out on londoncenter.org, our homepage. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce distinguished fellow Bryan Griffin. Bryan, welcome to Thought to Action.
Thanks for having me today.
So Bryan, boy howdy, there's a lot of things going on. I was on talking about Afghanistan this morning. At the time we're taping this, I'm actually getting ready to testify on election security a little bit later today in front of the Pennsylvania legislation. A lot of things going on, but one of the most important things at the federal level that people are recognizing is critical is this Joe Biden-driven and now congressionally picked up concept of adding seats to the Supreme Court. And for background, for the audience to understand, this is not the first time the Democrats have proposed something like this. Back in 1937, there was an effort, and let me bring it up here so I'm very accurate as kind of the introduction of this. There was something called the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill of 1937. And that's a polite way of court packing FDR style. So we've seen this movie before. It really didn't look good then because, surprise, surprise, he wanted to pack the court because they were saying his actions regarding the New Deal were unconstitutional. So rather than fix the illegality, they wanted to fix the court. So Bryan, what's your thoughts on this current effort?
So I think this is part of a larger trend that to me is quite troubling. And I just wrote about this in my regular commentary on WAMC Northeast Public Radio that I do as a distinguished fellow at the London Center. And I'll ask that link be associated with this video. But my piece is called Changing the Rules to Win. And I asked the question, is anybody noticing a trend here where the Democratic Party, when they can't get their way, quickly decides, okay, then we'll just change the rules until we can get our way. Right. And here's what I'm going to read a short excerpt from my piece so it can launch us into our discussion. Changing the rules has become, like I said, a trend for the Democrats lately. In a year's time, they've proposed abolishing the filibuster, changing the size of the Supreme Court, expanding the House of Representatives, and abolishing the Electoral College. And they've already taken unprecedented steps to remove committee members of the opposite party in the House. And of course, we know that Democrat state officials were making unilateral decisions to change established procedures of the election. So unfortunately, this is not going to be the last time we talk about one of these rule changes. But of course, right now, because of this newly introduced piece of legislation and the commission recently put in place by President Biden, we're talking about expanding the Supreme Court, which was something that was threatened during the primaries, right around the time when Amy Coney Barrett was being sworn into office, or at least going through the Senate procedure. This is a big deal. We haven't changed the size of the Supreme Court since 1869.
Right.
And I want to just also point this out. The groundwork is already being laid by those who are on the left in the media to frame this as either not out of the normal. Okay, there's a Washington Post headline that says Biden is considering overhauling the Supreme Court. And that's happened during every crisis in US democracy. Okay, so they want to either make it seem like this is commonplace, or that the crisis in democracy right now is happening at such a level, to such an extent, that this is justifiable. So let me be very clear. The crisis in democracy is a difference in political opinion,
right?
Which is not a crisis in democracy. And if you change the rules every time you have a difference in political opinion and you call it a crisis of democracy, then what's the point of having rules at all? And then with regards to this is just commonplace. No, again, 1869 was the last time that we changed the size of the Supreme Court. Now, before that, it was unsettled as to whether the Supreme Court was going to represent one justice per circuit. And there were a lot of procedural and structural issues that led to changes in the Supreme Court. But after that, political threats and political motivations for changing the size of the Supreme Court have been tried, like you said, by Democrats, and failed, because the Supreme Court should not be restructured based on a political agenda.
Right.
Seems like an obvious point to make. That would be the crisis of democracy, in my opinion, if we change and shuffle the rules of government or the size of the Supreme Court every time we disagree with the politics behind it.
So let's look at the landscape, because your point is well taken. Right now, we have the narrowest of margins of division within the legislative branch. And as we all know who have studied this a day or two, the theory is we have three competing, equally important, equally weighted branches of government to check each other. Obviously, the executive branch, which executes the laws which are stipulated by the legislative, and the courts then work to make sure that those laws are faithfully carried out, or more importantly, are unconstitutional. These three entities are supposed to be able to basically counterbalance. The founding fathers were very wise in creating checks and balances. This was a critical one. So what I see here, based on studying this both as a political scientist, as my professional degree is focused on, this is an attempt to essentially overwhelm, subdue, and otherwise get rid of those checks and balances. We're talking about a very severe act to basically decapitate one of the three branches for purposes of political gain. Now, as I go through this, Bryan, one of the things I want to throw in front of you to think about is the potential effect of this as a debate issue. Not even if we get to the point of where this happens. I don't think we're going to get there. At least I hope not. But
not as well.
What is going to happen now as we go into the debate on this? Because obviously battle lines are being drawn. While we as the London Center have no official position, I think every fellow I know of, no matter where they stand in the political spectrum, all are against the idea of any diminution of the authorities stipulated to any one of the three branches of government. So how do you see this shaping up over the next couple of months as we develop the debate on this?
Yeah, well, we've already seen the groundwork being laid for how this is going to be framed. Somehow conservatives represent, this is the left talking, conservatives represent a threat to democracy. Mm-hmm. By the way, right now, most of the conservatives' efforts are simply enforcing laws on the books.
That's right.
I mean, that's what's going on with this election integrity. We want the laws on the books to be followed.
I'm saying that today in my testimony. Absolutely.
That's being labeled as a threat to democracy.
Right.
Now, having justices that have been appointed by a president of the opposite party is a threat to democracy. So we already know the angle they're going to take, and that has got to be pushed back upon it. And hopefully that, that can be seen through very clearly by the American public. And I don't think the American public wants the Supreme Court to change. And by the way, I don't think the Democrats really want to do this, because if they follow through with this, then what's to say that the next Republican president doesn't change us from 13 to 17, right? And then they add, it just goes back and forth. That's the reason that we have to respect the established precedent of the justice, the size of the justices on the Supreme Court. But more importantly, we should be pushing the point here in response to this crisis of democracy to question the motives of this change. And they're so plainly political that injects politics into a branch of the government that is supposed to be apolitical. That could be the greatest threat, like I said, to our democracy of the modern time.
Brian, they're completely histronic in their approach. They're saying in one hand, oh, this always happens every time a president comes in. And on the other hand, like you pointed out, they're saying, oh, no, this is a crisis. You can't have both. You can't have, we always do this and it's a crisis. And they do this on a lot of issues. This one is most severely apparent at this point. So how do we then get the conservatives to grow a backbone and actually stand up and say something? Because while I see a few folks out there, the usual suspects who are out there trying to get this to go, I've never understood why so many folks on the conservative side aren't out there screaming from the rooftops on how dangerous this is.
I thought Jim Jordan did a good job when he
Yeah.
started in on this at the committee hearing where it was first brought up that the Democrats were planning this. And he pinned them to the wall on this. Are you planning to try to pack the Supreme Court? The Democrats have been on both sides of a lot of issues for a while.
Yeah.
We need to start making that very plain and transparent, and we need to start using their own words in an argument against them. Here's another example, a perfect applicability here, the filibuster.
Mhm.
Right now, they want to get rid of the filibuster. Previously, they wanted to save the filibuster. Before that, they got rid of the filibuster for judicial appointees. So, I mean, it's transparent that it's not a real principled approach if you've been on both sides of it in the last several years. And I think that we need to have those statements on repeat, and then let's just all agree. And this seems like a bipartisan standard here. The rules are the rules for a reason. If we change them every time we want to get our way, then there's no use in having rules. Now, I hope and I think that this will not pass. This legislative effort will not pass because I don't think that there are enough Democrat members of Congress who will sign on to this idea. I do think there are Democrats who respect the institutions of the United States government, just like Republicans are doing and are defending right now. But I'll say this, we're starting a very dangerous trend if we allow the narrative to go unchecked, that this is any one of the above that I have already mentioned. Oh, this happens all the time. Or, oh, this is because of, this threat to democracy, AKA our political opinions. That's where we have to start to push back, because those narratives can lay the groundwork for future actions like this.
So let me start to close this out with a question that relates to the very thing you mentioned, the complete and utter, as Chris Plant, one of our local personalities, say, if it wasn't for double standards, the Democrats would have no standards at all, because they're constantly going back and forth. But they succeed. They push the football down the field. They gain 8 yards. They get kicked back 6, but they've made 2, and they continue that. How do we combat this? Because again, our side, who basically says, let's follow the rules and let the American people have their say, these people are bent on attempting to change rules for purposes of eliminating democratic processes. So ironic, their name is the Democrats, yet they seem to be so opposed to the democratic process of deciding issues. So what do we do? I mean, what do we have to do to make sure that people start paying attention, so that yeah, things are going to swing back to the conservative side eventually, but they've made gains, and those gains will probably be made permanent if we don't do anything.
Good question, Tony. But I think where we start is that, people who understand and respect the rule of law and the institutions of our democracy need to stand up and speak out, both elected and unelected, even in the face of what will be inevitable cancel culture attack. You stand up for election integrity. You stand up for keeping the Supreme Court the same size. You stand up for the rules that are on the books. You're going to be called all sorts of names. You're going to have to persist through it, because that has now become a tactic, unfortunately, of a political agenda, largely coming from the left, right, where if you push back on this, if you articulate, aversion at all to the rules when they don't fit the political agenda of the narrative driving entity, then you're demonized and you're dehumanized. And that has got to stop. So I really do hope that people who are able can start articulating great opposition to this peacefully, consistently, intelligently. We can use facts. We can use the history that Democrats, like I said, have on the record themselves of being on so many different sides of this issues. I mean, trust me, if this was a Republican thinking about this, the media would be nonstop ringing the alarm bells about the threats to democracy that the country faces by changing the Constitution of the Supreme Court. But the shoe is on the other foot. So now the threat to democracy is not changing the size of the Supreme Court. I mean, enough is enough. We've got to be very persistent in calling out the double standards and supporting the institutions of our country here.
Well stated, Bryan. I appreciate your coming on and laying this out so clearly for our followers and supporters. And we'll continue this discussion, I'm sure. This is not going to go away anytime soon. When you combine this with the issues relating to the current investigation of white supremacy within DOD, the issue of attempting to use climate science in a political way to change the way we interact and provide energy to our people, to our Second Amendment issues, where there's this complete and utter easily disprovable narrative being put forth, trying to justify very severe gun restrictions. It's all related, and it's all related to a narrative process that the left uses with their allies in the media to completely disregard facts. And we've talked about this, you and I, before here, that there's a war. There's an effort to essentially destroy objective truth, and that's something that relates directly to what's going on here regarding the packing of the courts. So, Bryan, thanks for joining us today on Thought to Action.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching and listening to Thought to Action. If you like our program and would like to help us expand content, please join our Patreon community, where we offer exclusive content and access to our Ask Us Anything question and answer sessions. Please subscribe to Thought to Action. Hit the red bell to keep updated on our new videos. Like, share, subscribe. It helps us keep the audience growing. And please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course through londoncenter.org, our website. So thank you again for joining us. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, President of the London Center for Policy Research, and we'll see you again real soon on Thought to Action.